I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president slapped me with a lawsuit for a dog that doesn't even exist, then called the cops the moment I laughed at the paperwork. Her reason? She said how I talked to her was harassment. Funny thing is, the only thing making noise that day was her fragile ego. Let me start from the beginning. It started, as most of my wars did, at dawn, not with the roar of an incoming rocket, but with the polite, insistent knock of a police officer at my front door. I cracked the door open, my body still stiff with sleep, and saw two of our local finest standing on my porch. They looked young, uncomfortable, and like they'd rather be anywhere else. Behind them, parked at the curb with its light bar flashing just enough to annoy the entire neighborhood, was a cruiser. And across the street, peering through her pristine bay window in a pink cardigan like a vulture watching a wounded animal, was Eleanor Vance. She even gave a little wave. I didn't wave back. This wasn't a friendly morning greeting. This was a statement. This was her planting a flag. "Mr. Ethan Cole?" the taller officer asked. He held a clipboard, the universal symbol for someone about to ruin your day. "That's me," I said, my voice gritty. I leaned against the door frame, making a point not to look intimidated. In my old line of work, a calm demeanor in the face of authority, legitimate or otherwise, was an essential survival tool. "Something I can help you with, officers?" "We've received another complaint from the Homeowners Association president, Ms. Vance," he said, avoiding my eyes and focusing on his paperwork, regarding a violation of county leash laws and harboring an unregistered animal. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. A real, genuine laugh. It was just so stupid, so monumentally, breathtakingly idiotic. I bit it back, but a smirk must have leaked out. "Let me guess. A large, ferocious beast, right? Probably a corgi. I hear they're vicious." The second officer, a kid who looked like he'd just started shaving last week, shifted his weight. "Sir, she claims it's a dog. A large one. Says it was barking all night again." "Again?" I asked, my voice dripping with the sarcasm I could no longer contain. "That's funny because my wife, Olivia, and I slept like babies. Didn't hear a thing. And you know why? Because we don't own a dog." I spread my arms wide. "Feel free to look. No dog food, no water bowl, no chew toys, no dog. There is a distinct and verifiable lack of canine in this household." The first officer sighed. It was the sound of a man who knew exactly what was going on but was trapped by procedure. "Sir, we're just obligated to follow up. She's filed a formal complaint, again, and this time she's attached copies of the fines she's levied against you. They're substantial." I knew about the fines. They arrived in my mailbox every other day in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, the HOA's logo embossed in gaudy gold at the top. The first one was for $50. The next for $100. The latest one, which I'd used as a coaster the night before, was for $500 plus a $200 legal processing fee for a dog that didn't exist. It was extortion, plain and simple, but wrapped in the polite language of bylaws and community standards. "She can fine me for owning a dragon for all I care," I said. "It doesn't make it real." From across the street, Eleanor's front door opened. She stepped out onto her porch, a cordless phone pressed to her ear, and started pointing dramatically at my house. She was performing for the whole neighborhood. "Look at the dangerous rule breaker. See how I, your brave president, am forced to summon law enforcement to protect you." It was a masterclass in petty tyranny. The officer's radio crackled. "Dispatch, car 7. The complainant is on the phone stating the subject is becoming hostile." I stared at him. Hostile? I was leaning. I was smirking. My most aggressive act was exercising my vocabulary. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "Look, sir," the officer said, lowering his voice. "Just between you and me, this is getting old. But she's the HOA president. She knows how to file the paperwork. Our hands are tied. We have to respond." This made police visit number 2. The first was at dawn, and the third would be much uglier. He handed me a slip of paper. It wasn't a ticket. It was a notice. A formal record of the complaint. Another piece for Eleanor's paper trail. My advice: go to the next board meeting. Talk to them. Work it out. I took the paper. "Thanks for the advice, officer." But I knew it was useless. The board was her. The other members were just bobbleheads she'd installed herself. I'd already tried appealing. My emails went unanswered. My certified letters were returned unopened. They weren't interested in the truth. They were only interested in my compliance. As the police car pulled away, Eleanor gave me one last triumphant smirk before disappearing back into her house. The curtains twitched. She was still watching. I stood there on my porch in the morning light, the flimsy piece of paper in my hand. Olivia had been watching from the hallway, coffee cup forgotten in her hand. Olivia came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Peachy," I said. But it wasn't. This was the moment I finally understood this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a quirky neighbor dispute. This was a siege. I was in occupied territory, and the local government was either unwilling or unable to help. My home, the one place on earth I was supposed to feel safe, had become the front line in a war I didn't ask for. Eleanor Vance had just made a critical error. She mistook my desire for peace as a weakness. She thought she was dealing with a civilian. She had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. She had just poked the wrong bear, and I was done laughing. The game was on. But what I didn't realize then was that the phantom dog was just the excuse. The flimsy pretext for a much bigger, much more sinister plan. My life wasn't supposed to be like this. After 12 years in the army, with 2 tours that left more than just physical scars, all I wanted was quiet. I wanted a lawn to mow, a grill to stand over, and a front porch where I could sit with my wife, Olivia, and watch the sunset without worrying about what was coming over the horizon. When we found our house in the Lakeshore Meadows subdivision, it felt like we'd hit the jackpot. It was a peaceful little corner of the world, tucked away by a man-made lake, full of families and retirees. It was aggressively, beautifully normal. The sales pitch was all about community, safety, and protecting property values through a well-run homeowners association. At the time, that sounded like a good thing. Olivia and I had met just after I transitioned back to civilian life. I was working on my accounting degree, trying to channel my military-trained eye for detail into something less explosive. She was a librarian, a woman who radiated a calm that soothed the frayed edges of my soul. She saw past the soldier and found the man who just wanted to build a life. We poured every penny we had into that house. It was more than just wood and drywall. It was our foundation. It was the future. For the first 2 years, it was everything we dreamed of. We planted a garden. We got to know our neighbors. We lived a life so quiet it was almost boring. And I loved every second of it. My first interaction with Eleanor Vance was about my garbage cans. I'd left them at the curb an hour past the 7 p.m. deadline stipulated in the 300-page HOA covenant, a document I'm sure no one but her had ever read in its entirety. She didn't knock on my door. She didn't call. She just sent a formal warning letter with a photo of my offending garbage cans, time-stamped 8:01 p.m. It was weird. A little obsessive, sure, but I chalked it up to a lonely woman with too much time on her hands. I made sure to bring my cans in on time after that. I wasn't looking for trouble. Then came the letter about the unapproved brand of mulch I'd used in my flower beds. Apparently, only cypress blend mulch was acceptable. I had used cedar. The letter helpfully included a list of approved vendors. I saw her watching from her window as I spent a whole Saturday scooping out the perfectly good cedar mulch and replacing it with the officially sanctioned and significantly more expensive cypress. Olivia thought it was hilarious. "The mulch queen strikes again," she joked. But I felt a prickle of something else. It wasn't about the mulch. It was about control. Every regulation, every rule was another brick in the wall of her little kingdom. I started noticing her patterns. She'd walk the neighborhood every evening, a clipboard in her hand, peering at people's yards, striding in her trademark pastel pink power suit, clipboard clenched like a royal scepter. A weed here, a slightly faded mailbox there, each a tiny infraction that merited another one of her official-looking letters. Most people, like me, just sighed and complied. It was easier than fighting. The fines were small, the fixes were minor, and nobody wanted to be the neighborhood troublemaker. We were all just trying to live our lives. We let her have her little power trip because it didn't seem worth the energy to challenge it. That was our mistake. We were feeding the beast, letting it grow stronger with every small victory we handed it. I'd learned in the military that you have to understand the terrain and the nature of your enemy. Eleanor's terrain was the HOA bylaws. Her nature was that of a predator who tests the fences looking for weaknesses. She wasn't a leader. She was a warden. Her board members were a hand-picked collection of sycophants. There was Walter, a retired insurance salesman who visibly trembled whenever Eleanor looked at him. And Cynthia, a woman whose entire personality seemed to be agreeing with whatever Eleanor had just said. There was no debate, no discussion. It was the Eleanor Vance show, and they were her silent, nodding audience. The thing is, I'm a forensic accountant. My job is to find the story hidden in the numbers. I follow the money to uncover fraud, waste, and abuse. I look for patterns, for anomalies, for the one tiny thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire tapestry of a lie. It's a skill set that requires patience, precision, and a stubborn refusal to accept things at face value. I'd spent my post-military career taking down corrupt executives and money launderers. I just never in a million years thought I'd have to deploy those skills in my own quiet, peaceful neighborhood. I had willingly walked away from a world of conflict. I had chosen a life of spreadsheets and quiet evenings. But Eleanor Vance, with her clipboards and her petty rules, was slowly, methodically turning my peaceful sanctuary into a battlefield. She was escalating, testing my boundaries, seeing how much I would take. And with every passive-aggressive letter about mulch or garbage cans, she was reminding me of a fundamental truth I had tried to forget. Sometimes, the only way to get peace is to prepare for war. I was still trying to be the good neighbor, the quiet guy who just wanted to be left alone. I was still under the illusion that logic and reason would eventually prevail. That illusion was about to be shattered in the most ridiculous way possible. The first shot in the Phantom Dog War wasn't a gunshot. It was the whisper of paper sliding through my mail slot. It was one of Eleanor's signature cream-colored envelopes. I figured it was another warning about the height of my grass or the unauthorized color of our welcome mat. Olivia and I had started a betting pool on what the next infraction would be. I had my money on improperly pruned rose bushes. I was about to lose $5. I tore it open while standing in the kitchen, and I read the first line out loud to Olivia. Official notice of covenant violation, unpermitted pet. I paused. Unpermitted pet? We don't have a pet. Olivia looked up from her laptop. Maybe she's fining us for the squirrel that keeps stealing tomatoes from the garden. Does she have jurisdiction over squirrels? I kept reading. It has been brought to the attention of the board that a large dog resides at your property in direct violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the Lakeshore Meadows Covenants, which prohibits dogs over 40 pounds. I stopped and just stared at the paper. A dog. A large dog. I looked around my pristine, dog-hair-free living room. There was no dog. There had never been a dog. My first reaction was pure, unadulterated amusement. It was a mistake, a simple clerical error. They must have meant to send it to someone else. I chuckled, shaking my head at the sheer incompetence. Well, honey, I announced dramatically. It seems we have a secret dog. A very large, very secret dog. Have you been holding out on me? She played along. He's a ghost dog, she said with a perfectly straight face. He only appears at midnight to howl at the moon. His name is Bartholomew. We laughed. It was funny. It was the kind of harmless, bureaucratic screw-up that you tell your friends about at a barbecue. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I picked up the phone and called the HOA's main number, which I knew from experience went directly to Eleanor Vance's personal phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and businesslike. Lakeshore HOA, President Vance speaking. Hi, Eleanor. It's Ethan Cole from 12, Elm Court, I said, still smiling. Hey, I just got a violation notice from you guys about a dog, and I think there's been a bit of a mix-up. It's a funny story, actually. We don't have a dog, so you must have the wrong address. There was a cold silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that sucks all the humor out of a room. There is no mistake, Mr. Cole, she said, her voice dropping a few degrees. The complaint is valid. My smile faded. What complaint? Who complained? Because they're wrong. I can assure you 100% there is no dog here. A concerned neighbor reported excessive barking coming from your property for several nights in a row. She stated as if reading from a script. The board takes these noise complaints very seriously. This was when the first alarm bell went off in my head. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. Eleanor, I said, my tone shifting from amused to serious. I'm telling you as a fact, there is no dog. You are welcome to come over right now and inspect the premises. You can check the yard. You can look in the garage. There is no dog. That won't be necessary, she said coolly. The evidence has been noted. You have 14 days to either remove the animal or provide registration and DNA testing to prove it is under the 40 pounds weight limit. A $50 fine has been assessed to your account. Good day, Mr. Cole. And she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, utterly stunned. The absurdity of it was staggering. It felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality where logic didn't apply. 2 days after the summons landed, I sat on my porch rereading the absurd paperwork. I started to laugh again, but this time it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of disbelief. It was loud and a little unhinged. What else could I do? The situation was a farce. I was being fined for a fictional animal. I wrote a polite, formal letter of appeal. I laid out the facts clearly and concisely. I stated for the record that we did not own a dog and that the complaint was baseless. I sent it via certified mail so I'd have a record of them receiving it. A week later, it came back to me unopened, with refused stamped across the front in angry red ink. Tucked into my mailbox right next to it was another cream-colored envelope. This one contained a second notice. The fine had been escalated to $100 for failure to comply. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a rational person. This wasn't about rules or noise or community standards. This was a power play. She had made up a lie and she was going to ram it down my throat just to prove that she could. She was creating a problem out of thin air and then punishing me for not solving it. My laughter had been interpreted not as a sign of disbelief, but as a challenge to her authority. And Eleanor Vance was not a woman who backed down from a challenge. The phantom dog was no longer a joke. It was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at me. Things escalated quickly after that. The phantom dog went from being a bizarre bureaucratic nuisance to the central organizing principle of my life. It was like Eleanor had found a button labeled "Torment Ethan Cole" and was now pressing it with a relentless, gleeful rhythm. The fines kept coming, each one higher than the last. They started including late fees and administrative charges. My HOA account, according to her immaculate and utterly fictional records, was now delinquent to nearly $1,000. I tried to be the adult in the room. I sent another email, not just to Eleanor, but to the entire board, or at least to the two bobbleheads, Walter and Cynthia. I attached a video, a long, slow 30-minute walkthrough of my entire house, garage, and yard, narrated by me. And here we have the living room, I'd said, panning the camera slowly. Notice the distinct lack of dog beds. Here is the kitchen. No food bowls. And out here in the backyard. Well, would you look at that? No dog. The response was a notification that I had violated the HOA rules about filming other properties without permission, as a sliver of my neighbor's roof was visible in one shot, and another fine, of course, for $200. Then came the enforcers. That's what I called them anyway. Two beefy guys in matching navy blue polo shirts with a poorly embroidered Lakeshore Compliance logo on the chest. They drove a beat-up white sedan and started making slow, deliberate passes by my house several times a day. They'd park across the street for 20 minutes at a time, just staring. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Crude, but effective. Olivia started getting nervous. "Who are those men?" she asked, pulling the curtains shut. "They're just watching us." That's when my protective instincts kicked into overdrive. It was one thing for Eleanor to play her paper games with me. It was another thing entirely to make my wife feel unsafe in her own home. The war was no longer just about me and my principles. It was about her peace of mind. The final straw happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was on the phone with my brother, standing on my front porch, telling him the whole ridiculous story. I was laughing about it because sometimes you have to laugh to keep from screaming. Suddenly, two police cars, sirens blaring, screeched to a halt in front of my house. The same two officers from the first visit jumped out, hands on their holsters. "Sir, step away from the house with your hands in the air," the taller one yelled. I was so shocked, I just froze. What on earth is going on? I said to my brother, dropping my voice. "We have a 911 call reporting a man acting erratically, possibly armed, screaming at a neighbor's house," the officer shouted. I looked across the street, and there she was, Eleanor Vance, standing on her lawn, phone in hand, putting on the performance of a lifetime. She had a hand to her chest like she was about to faint, and she was pointing at me with a look of pure terror on her face. She had called the cops on me for laughing. She was trying to get me arrested, or worse. She was weaponizing law enforcement because I wouldn't bend to her will over a dog that didn't exist. I slowly put my hands up, my mind racing. This was a calculated, dangerous escalation. She was painting me as unstable, as a threat. In my old job, we called this shaping the battlefield. You create a narrative, you feed disinformation, and you isolate your target. My neighbors were starting to peek out their windows now, not with sympathy, but with suspicion. Eleanor's narrative was working. I was the crazy guy the cops were always visiting. The officers were professional enough. They quickly realized I was holding a phone, not a weapon, and that the only person screaming was Eleanor, who was now giving them a dramatic, tearful statement about how she feared for her life. They let me go with a warning about neighborly disputes. But the damage was done. The entire neighborhood had seen it. I walked back inside, my face a mask of cold fury. Olivia rushed to me, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, this has gone too far. This woman is unhinged." "I know," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the tremor of fear running through her. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. The time for being reasonable was over. The time for appeals and polite letters was over. My attempts to use the system had failed because Eleanor was the system. She had corrupted it, twisted it to her own ends. I looked out the window at her house, the self-appointed queen in her castle. That night, after Olivia had gone to sleep, I went down to my office in the basement. This was my sanctuary, the place where I untangled complex financial knots for a living. The walls were lined with whiteboards, usually covered in flowcharts and spreadsheets. Tonight, they were blank, a clean slate. I stood in the middle of the room and took a deep breath. The switch had been flipped. The part of me I'd tried to leave behind in the dust of Afghanistan, the methodical, patient, strategic part, was now fully online. The mission, dismantle Eleanor Vance's empire. The objective, reclaim my peace. My first call was to the one person I knew would understand. The one person who would see this not as a petty neighborhood squabble, but as the kind of asymmetric warfare it had become. I dialed the number from memory. He answered on the first ring, his voice a gravelly bark. "You'd better be on fire or bleeding." "Rocco," I said, "I've got a situation, buddy." Rocco and I had gone through basic training together. We'd served in the same unit. While I'd gone into intelligence analysis, Rocco had been on the more kinetic side of things. After the army, he'd bounced around before landing as a part-time private investigator. He was brilliant, loyal, and just a little bit crazy. He treated every case, whether it was a cheating spouse or a missing cat, like he was planning a Black Ops mission. He was perfect. I spent 20 minutes laying it all out for him. The phantom dog, the fines, the fake enforcers, the cops, Eleanor. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He was silent for a long time after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice was chillingly serious. "She called the cops on you with a false report." "A man with a gun call?" "Yeah," I said. "That was the grand finale this afternoon." "Okay," he said, and I could hear the click of a keyboard in the background. "This is no longer a civil matter. This is an act of war. That's attempted swatting. That's a felony in this state, Ethan. This woman isn't just a power-tripping lunatic. She's dangerous." I heard more typing. Eleanor Vance, age 58, president of Lakeshore Meadows HOA. Divorced, no kids. Been president for 6 years. Interesting. "What's interesting?" I asked. "Nothing yet, but my gut is telling me there's something here. People don't go this hard over a non-existent dog. There's another angle. We just haven't found it yet. I'm in. What's the plan?" The plan was already forming in my mind. It was a classic two-pronged attack. The first prong was defense and evidence collection. The second was offense and intelligence gathering. "I need my house to be a hard target," I said. "I want eyes and ears everywhere, every angle covered. I want a complete record of every vehicle that passes, every person who steps on my lawn." "Done," Rocco said. "I've got some high-res, night vision security cameras in my van. We'll turn your house into Fort Knox. I've also got a new toy, a little drone, quiet as a hummingbird. Perfect for some aerial reconnaissance. See what Queen Eleanor is up to in her backyard." "Good," I said. "While you handle the physical security, I'll handle the financial." This was my turf. I pulled up the state's business registry and found the HOA's official filings. I requested copies of their annual budgets and meeting minutes for the past 6 years. Most of it was public record, stuff they couldn't hide. "I'm going to do what I do best, Rocco. I'm going to conduct a full forensic audit of the Lakeshore Meadows Homeowners Association. I'm going to follow every single penny they've spent since she took over. Rocco let out a low whistle. You're going to financially waterboard them. I love it. The next day, Rocco showed up in his rusty work van that screamed, definitely not a private investigator. We spent the entire day setting up the system. We installed small, discrete cameras under the eaves of my roof, covering the front door, the driveway, the street in both directions, and the backyard. We linked them to a secure server in my basement. From my computer, I could now watch a live feed of my entire property. We even put up signs. This property is under 24-hour video surveillance. It was a warning, a clear signal to Eleanor that the rules had changed. While Rocco was on a ladder, I was on my laptop digging. The first batch of HOA documents I'd requested had arrived via email. The budgets were a mess. Vague line items like landscaping, $80,000, or community maintenance, $50,000. The numbers were round, a classic red flag for a forensic accountant. Real-world costs are never round numbers. I started cross-referencing the approved vendor list from the old mulch letter with state business records. The landscaping company, Green Pastures LLC, had been formed just 6 years ago, right after Eleanor became president. Its registered agent? A man named Walter. The same Walter who sat on her board and trembled in her presence. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it. This was the thread. The phantom dog wasn't the point. It was the distraction. It was the loud noise she was making over here to keep me from looking over there. The real story was in the numbers, hidden in plain sight. She was using this HOA as her personal piggy bank, and I was just the latest nail that needed to be hammered down because I wasn't playing along. She thought she was suing me over a dog. She had no idea that I was about to put her entire corrupt organization under a microscope. The war had begun, and I had just found my way behind enemy lines. The next few weeks were a deep dive into the rabbit hole. Our little operation turned my basement into a command center. One of my whiteboards was now covered in a spider web of names, companies, and dollar amounts, all connected by red marker lines. It was a work of art, a beautiful mural of corruption. Rocco and I would meet there every night, sharing our findings like two generals planning a campaign. He brought the field intel. I brought the financial data. Rocco, true to his nature, was having the time of his life. He took to his drone reconnaissance with a passion that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. He named the drone the Wasp. Every evening, he'd launch it from a park 2 blocks away and conduct a high-altitude flyover of the neighborhood, focusing on Eleanor's property and those of her board members. Target is in her garden over-pruning her azaleas. A clear act of botanical aggression. He'd report back in a deadpan whisper, as if he were tracking a high-value target in a hostile country. His surveillance paid off in unexpected ways. He discovered that Eleanor's compliance enforcers, the 2 goons in the polo shirts, weren't a security company. They were her nephews. He got their license plate, ran it, and found they had a string of minor charges. They weren't enforcers. They were just bullies on their aunt's payroll. A payroll, I was quickly discovering, was funded by all of us. My side of the investigation was less glamorous, but far more damning. The HOA's books were a disaster, but a carefully constructed one. Every major contract had gone to a company owned by a friend or relative of Eleanor or one of her board members. The Green Pastures LLC landscaping company, run by her trembling board member Walter, had overbilled the HOA by at least 40% every year compared to standard market rates. Where did that extra money go? I couldn't prove it yet, but I had a pretty good idea. It was a classic kickback scheme. I found the contract for pool maintenance. The company, Crystal Clear Pools, was registered to a woman named Cynthia. The very same Cynthia who sat on the board and echoed Eleanor's every word. The pool, by the way, had been closed for emergency repairs for 2 of the last 3 summers. Yet, the payments to her company had never stopped. I cross-referenced the dates of the payments with social media. I found Cynthia's public profile. During the weeks the pool was supposedly being fixed, she had posted pictures of herself on a cruise to the Bahamas. I saved the photos. Every thread I pulled revealed another lie. It wasn't just about greed. It was about control. Eleanor had used the HOA funds to install a new, expensive security gate at the entrance to our community. The contract for that gate went to a company owned by her brother-in-law. The price was nearly double the quotes from 3 other reputable firms. But she had sold it to the community as a necessary security upgrade, a way to keep us all safe. In reality, it was just another way to funnel our money to her family. The phantom dog, the mulch, the garbage cans, it was all a smokescreen. The constant barrage of petty violations kept the residents off balance, angry about the little things so they wouldn't look at the big picture. This was the point where the moral crossroads appeared. I had enough evidence to blow the lid off the financial fraud. I could send an anonymous package to the state attorney general and walk away. My personal problem, the phantom dog, would probably disappear once Eleanor had bigger things to worry about. But would that be enough? This woman had terrorized my family. She had made my wife afraid in our own home. She had abused her power, not just against me, but against this entire community. Simply exposing the fraud felt incomplete. It felt like letting her get away with the deeper crime, the deliberate and malicious use of fear. Olivia was the one who centered me. She saw the dark, obsessive look in my eyes as I spent night after night in the basement. One evening, she came down with 2 cups of tea. She didn't look at the whiteboard of conspiracy. She just looked at me. "What are you going to do, Ethan?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to expose her," I said. "All of it. The money, the fake companies, the kickbacks." "And then what?" she asked. "Will that make us feel safe again? Will that stop the next person like her from doing the same thing?" She was right. The core of the problem wasn't the money. The money was just a symptom. The disease was the unchecked power and the culture of fear that she had cultivated. If I just took out Eleanor, the system that allowed her to thrive would still be in place. Another bully could just step into the void. The question wasn't just how to punish Eleanor. It was how to give the power back to the community she had taken it from. It was no longer enough to win. I had to win in a way that taught a lesson. I had to dismantle her machines so publicly, so completely that no one would ever dare to build it again in our neighborhood. The mission had changed. It wasn't just about getting justice for myself. It was about liberating Lakeshore Meadows. And to do that, I couldn't just be an accountant. I had to be a warrior. The time for quiet analysis was over. The next phase of the plan would be loud, confrontational, and it would happen on her turf. Eleanor must have sensed something was wrong. Maybe I stopped responding to her fine notices. Maybe she noticed the new cameras glinting under my eaves. Or maybe her finely tuned tyrant senses just told her that her prey was no longer afraid. Whatever the reason, she decided to force a confrontation. She overplayed her hand, and I was more than ready for it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in my home office on a conference call when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a series of hard, insistent presses. I looked at the monitor displaying my front door camera feed. It was Eleanor, and she wasn't alone. She had her 2 beefy compliance nephews with her, and standing slightly behind them, looking incredibly uncomfortable, was a man holding a toolbox, a locksmith. I excused myself from my call and walked to the door. I didn't open it. I spoke through the intercom system we'd installed. "Can I help you, Eleanor?" My voice was calm, amplified slightly by the small speaker. She was startled. She hadn't expected me to be home, or at least not to be ready for her. She recovered quickly, puffing up her chest. "Mr. Cole, as you know, you are in gross violation of the HOA covenants regarding an unpermitted animal. You have refused to comply with our notices. Therefore, under Article 12, Section 7 of the bylaws, the board has authorized an immediate inspection of your property to confirm the presence of the animal." Her nephews took a step forward, trying to look intimidating. It was a pathetic attempt at a show of force. The locksmith just stared at his shoes, probably wishing he'd stayed in bed. I knew Article 12, Section 7 by heart. I'd read the entire covenant cover to cover. It stated the HOA could inspect common areas, but required 48-hour written notice and the homeowner's consent to inspect a private dwelling unless there was a clear and present danger, like a fire or a flood. Her phantom dog didn't qualify. "I haven't received any written notice, Eleanor," I said, my voice still perfectly level. "And I certainly do not consent to an inspection. You are not entering my home." "I don't need your consent," she snapped, her voice rising. The mask of polite authority was slipping, revealing the raw entitlement beneath. "The bylaws give me the authority. If you refuse to open the door, I will have this man open it for me, and you will be billed for the service along with a fine for noncompliance." She gestured to the locksmith. This was it. The moment she crossed the line from civil harassment to criminal action, and my cameras were recording every single second of it in high-definition video and audio. I let her finish her little speech. I let her dig the hole a little deeper. Then I replied, my voice turning to ice. Eleanor, let me be very clear with you. What you are describing is not an inspection. It is breaking and entering. The HOA covenant, which you seem to enjoy quoting, is a civil agreement. It does not, and legally cannot, supersede state law. If you or any of your associates attempt to force entry into my home, I will consider it a direct threat to the safety of myself and my family, and I will defend my home accordingly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She wasn't used to people knowing the law better than she did. She was used to people cowering. I continued, pressing my advantage. Furthermore, I am holding in my hand a phone. The 911 operator is on the line as we speak. I am informing them that the president of my HOA is on my doorstep, accompanied by 2 unknown men, threatening to illegally break into my house. There are already 2 police cars on their way. My advice to you, and to the locksmith who is about to become an accessory to a crime, is to be gone before they arrive. Every word of this conversation is being recorded. The effect was instantaneous. The locksmith's head shot up, his eyes wide with panic. He took a step back, then another, then turned and practically ran back to his van. The word felony tends to clear a conscience fast. The locksmith was gone in 10 seconds. Eleanor's nephews looked at each other, their bravado completely gone. One of them muttered, Aunt Eleanor, maybe we should just go. Eleanor stood there, frozen. Her face was a storm of fury, humiliation, and disbelief. She had come here for a final, crushing victory, to put the rebellious homeowner in his place. Instead, she was the one being put in her place, publicly and decisively. She was a general whose army had just deserted her on the battlefield. She pointed a trembling finger at the camera above my door. You'll pay for this, Ethan Cole. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, Eleanor, I said through the intercom, my voice soft but carrying the weight of all the evidence I had piled up in my basement. But I promise you, you have no idea who you're dealing with. She stared at my front door for another 10 seconds, her chest heaving. Then, without another word, she spun around and stomped back across the street, her nephews trailing behind her like defeated puppies. The action peak had passed. I had held the line, but her threat echoed in the air. I knew this wasn't over. She was cornered now, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I knew she would try something else, something bigger. But so would I. And thanks to Rocco, I was about to find the one weapon that would end this war for good. The failed home invasion was a turning point. Eleanor had exposed a fatal weakness, desperation. She was losing control, and she knew it. For me, it was a validation of my strategy. For Rocco, it was a call to arms. He was energized, convinced now more than ever that we were missing the final piece of the puzzle. The financial fraud was huge, but it didn't fully explain the laser-like, obsessive focus on me and my specific property. It's not just about the money, Ethan, he said that night in the command center, pacing back and forth in front of the whiteboard. It's personal. She wants you gone. Not just quiet, not just compliant, gone. Evicted, foreclosed on, whatever it takes. Why? Why your house? That was the question. My house was nice, but it was just like a dozen other houses in the neighborhood. Same builder, same floor plan. There was nothing special about it. Or so I thought. I want you to dig deeper into Eleanor, I told him. Not just her financials. Her family, her associates, anyone she talks to regularly. There's a connection we're not seeing. Rocco grinned. This was the kind of work he lived for. You want me to go full spectrum recon on the target and her network? Say no more. For the next 48 hours, Rocco went dark. He didn't answer my texts or calls. I knew he was deep in whatever rabbit hole he'd found. I used the time to refine my own work. I organized the financial evidence into a clear, easy-to-understand presentation. I created charts showing the flow of HOA funds into the fake companies. I compiled a timeline of every threat, every fine, every illegal action Eleanor had taken against me, complete with video clips from my security cameras. I was building an airtight case, a kill shot for when the time was right. Then, on Thursday night, Rocco called me. He sounded different. The usual manic energy in his voice was gone, replaced by a kind of awed excitement. Meet me at the diner now, he said. And bring your laptop. You are not going to believe this. I met him in a back booth at a 24-hour Greasy Spoon on the other side of town. He had a pile of documents spread out on the table in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, but his eyes were shining. Okay, he began, his voice low. So Eleanor has a cousin, a first cousin named Douglas Vance. He's a bit of a black sheep in the family. Tried a bunch of failed businesses. But about 6 months ago, right when your dog problem started, Douglas filed incorporation papers for a new company. He slid a document across the table. It was a business registration for a company called the Gilded Leash LLC. The Gilded Leash? I asked. What the hell is that? It's a holding company, Rocco said. But I dug into the county planning commission records. Douglas, through the Gilded Leash, submitted a preliminary development proposal. He wants to build a luxury resort. I must have looked confused. A resort in our neighborhood? There's no land for a resort. Rocco's grin was predatory. Oh, it's not for people, Ethan. It's for dogs. He shoved another paper in front of me. It was a promotional brochure, clearly a draft, full of glossy photos of happy dogs getting massages and swimming in bone-shaped pools. The title read, The K9 Country Club and Spa, where every pup is pampered. It promised gourmet organic meals, private suites with orthopedic bedding, and a full-service spa offering pedicures and aromatherapy. It was the most absurd thing I had ever seen. You're kidding me. A dog spa? Not just a dog spa, Rocco said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A world-class, multi-million-dollar K9 utopia. And here is the kicker. He pulled out one final document and unfolded it carefully on the table. It was a blueprint, a site plan. It showed the layout of the proposed K9 Country Club. There were the kennels, the spa building, the swimming pool, the agility course. He then took out a property map of our subdivision and laid it on top of the blueprint. He lined them up perfectly. My blood ran cold. The agility course was planned for Mrs. Albright's backyard 2 doors down. The main spa and reception building would sit on my next-door neighbor's property. And the centerpiece, the largest structure, the main kennel and luxury suite building, it was right on top of my land. My house. My garden. My life. It all clicked into place. The phantom dog, the relentless harassment, the attempts to paint me as unstable, the desperation to get inside my house or force me out. It was never about a dog. It was never about the rules. It was a coordinated, malicious campaign to drive me and my neighbors out. She wasn't just trying to find me. She was trying to condemn my property, to make my life so miserable that I would sell cheap and run. She was trying to clear the way for her cousin's ridiculous, multi-million-dollar dog palace. I stared at the blueprint, at the lines and squares that represented the complete destruction of my home, all for this insane project. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was stunning. She wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was a wannabe real estate tycoon playing a ruthless game of Monopoly with people's lives. She's trying to steal my house, I said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. Rocco nodded slowly. And not just yours. 3 of you, all in a row. The 3 houses she's been targeting the hardest for the past year with the most ridiculous violations. It's a land grab, Ethan. Plain and simple. I leaned back in the booth, the greasy smell of the diner fading into the background. The rage I felt was cold and clean. This changed everything. This elevated the stakes from a battle for justice to a war for survival. Eleanor Vance wasn't just trying to find me into submission. She was trying to erase me. And I now had the one thing I needed to erase her instead. I had the motive. I had the truth. And I had a plan. The next HOA meeting was in 5 days. It was time to go public. The 5 days leading up to the HOA meeting were the calm before the storm. On the surface, I went about my life. I mowed my lawn. I waved at my neighbors. I gave no indication that the world was about to be turned upside down. But in my basement, the command center was buzzing with quiet, focused energy. The mission was no longer just to expose Eleanor. It was to execute a flawless public takedown. There could be no mistakes, no room for her to wriggle free. Rocco and I worked with surgical precision. He reached out to my 2 neighbors whose properties were also on the dog spa blueprint. At first, they were hesitant. They were scared. Eleanor had been terrorizing them for years, too. One for the color of their shutters, the other for a supposed oil stain on their driveway. They were beaten down. But when Rocco showed them the blueprint, when they saw their homes slated for demolition to make way for a pedicure station, their fear, turned to white-hot anger. They were in. We now had a coalition. My job was to weaponize the data. I condensed months of financial investigation and surveillance into a single, devastating PowerPoint presentation. It was my masterpiece. I named it A 6-Year Review of Lakeshore Meadows HOA, a study in mismanagement and malfeasance. It started innocently enough with the publicly available budgets. Then, slide by slide, it began to peel back the layers. Slide 5. An introduction to Green Pastures LLC, the landscaping company owned by board member Walter. Slide 6. A chart comparing their exorbitant rates to 3 other local companies, showing a 40% overcharge totaling over $192,000 in excess payments over 6 years. Slide 7. An introduction to Cynthia's crystal clear pools, followed by a slide showing the proof of payment for services during the exact weeks she was posting vacation photos from the Bahamas. I had arrows. I had highlights. I made it simple, clear, and impossible to deny. The final section was the kill shot. I had a slide titled, The Motive, Why 12 Elm Court. It showed a picture of my house. The next slide was the business registration for the Gilded Leash LLC, showing its owner, Douglas Vance. The next slide was the promotional art for the K9 Country Club and Spa. A low murmur would surely ripple through the crowd at this point. Then, the finale, the site plan blueprint overlaid on our neighborhood map, with my home and my neighbors' homes glowing in red. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Usually, only a handful of people showed up to these things, but Rocco and my allied neighbors had spread the word. You need to be at this meeting. Everything will be explained. The air was thick with tension and curiosity. Eleanor sat at the head table on the small stage, flanked by a nervous-looking Walter and Cynthia. She beamed, radiating false warmth. She loved having an audience. She ran through the usual agenda items, pool repair updates, a reminder about garbage cans. She had no idea she was presiding over her own execution. Finally, she said the words I had been waiting for. We will now open the floor for resident comments. Please keep your statements to 2 minutes. This was my cue. I walked calmly to the front, holding a thumb drive. Rocco was already at the back of the room, positioned next to the projector. He gave me a subtle nod. Another neighbor, a tech-savvy teenager, was sitting in the front row, his phone set up to live stream. A red light on his phone blinked. 200 neighbors were already watching live. Good evening. I began, my voice steady and clear, projecting to every corner of the room. My name is Ethan Cole from 12 Elm Court. For the last 6 months, many of you have seen me be fined, harassed, and even had the police called on me, all over a phantom dog I do not own. I'm here tonight to explain why. Eleanor's smile tightened. Mr. Cole, this is not the forum for personal grievances. You have 2 minutes. Don't worry, Eleanor, I said, using her first name for the first time in public. The familiarity was a small act of defiance, a signal that I was no longer playing by her rules. This isn't personal. It's business. Your business. I nodded to Rocco. He plugged the thumb drive into the laptop connected to the projector. The first slide lit up the large screen behind Eleanor's head. The title slide. She turned to look at it, her eyes widening in confusion. For the next 10 minutes, I walked the neighborhood through her entire web of lies. With each slide, the mood in the room shifted. Murmurs grew into gasps. People started pulling out their phones, recording. I kept my voice calm and factual, letting the evidence speak for itself. When the photos of Cynthia's cruise appeared next to the pool maintenance invoices, she literally shrank in her chair. When the chart showing Walter's overbilling appeared, he went pale and looked like he was going to be sick. Eleanor tried to stop me. This is out of order. This is slander. Turn that projector off, she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. But no one moved. The entire room was captivated, watching the slow, methodical dismantling of her authority. The residents had her trapped. Then came the final slides, the dog spa, the blueprint. A collective gasp went through the room. People turned to stare at me, then at my neighbors, then back at the screen. The phantom dog, the endless petty violations. It all made sense now. I turned from the screen and looked directly at Eleanor. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and panic. She was exposed. Her schemes were laid bare for the whole world to see. That's when the mutiny began. Walter, trembling, stood up. I had no choice. he stammered, looking at the angry faces in the crowd. She made me do it. I resigned from the board, effective immediately. He practically ran from the stage. A moment later, Cynthia followed, bursting into tears. I didn't want to. I'm sorry, she sobbed, grabbing her purse and fleeing out a side door. Now it was just Eleanor, alone on the stage, the damning blueprint projected above her head like a crown of shame. The room erupted in a chorus of angry questions and accusations. Her empire hadn't just cracked. It had been shattered into a million pieces in the span of 10 minutes, live-streamed for posterity. She was a queen with no court, no cronies, and no subjects. Just a room full of people who finally knew the truth. In the chaotic aftermath of the presentation, Eleanor Vance was left completely isolated. She stood on that stage speechless as the furious homeowners she had lorded over for years closed in around her, shouting questions, demanding answers. The live stream Rocco's young accomplice had set up was blowing up. People who hadn't even been at the meeting were commenting, sharing, tagging local news outlets. Her reign of terror ended not with a bang, but with the furious clicking of 100 cell phones recording her humiliation. She tried to stammer out a defense, something about misunderstood documents, and a proposal that was never serious, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of a community that had finally found its voice. I didn't stay to watch the final collapse. My job was done. As the crowd surged toward the stage, I quietly slipped out the back door and walked home through the cool night air. The streets of Lakeshore Meadows felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight of Eleanor's rule, a presence I hadn't even been fully aware of until it was gone, had lifted. When I walked in my front door, Olivia was waiting for me. She had been watching the live stream. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me, and I felt the last of the tension drain out of me. We had our home back. The fallout was swift and absolute. The next morning, 2 detectives from the county's Economic Crimes Unit showed up at Eleanor's door. My anonymous tip, sent an hour before the meeting and containing the full, unredacted evidence package, had landed on the right desk. They didn't just take her statement. They left with her in the back of a police car. The investigation into the HOA's finances was officially open. Walter and Cynthia, in a desperate attempt to save themselves, gave full confessions detailing years of kickbacks, fraud, and embezzlement, all orchestrated by Eleanor. A special emergency meeting was called a week later to officially dissolve the old board and elect a new one. I was nominated for president. I stood up, thanked them, and respectfully declined. I'm a numbers guy, not a politician, I said. All I ever wanted was to be left alone to enjoy my home in peace. I just want to be a good neighbor. A wonderful retired school teacher named Mrs. Peterson, a woman known for her fairness and legendary rose garden, was elected instead. Her first official act was to propose a motion to expunge all fines and violations issued under Eleanor's tenure and to hire an independent firm to audit the last 6 years of spending. The motion passed unanimously. Justice, I learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. Eleanor Vance is now facing a mountain of legal trouble and will likely be paying restitution to the HOA for years to come. Her name is mud. But the real victory wasn't seeing her fall. The real victory was watching my neighbors talk to each other again. Not in hushed whispers about the latest violation, but in open conversation, laughing, planning a community barbecue. The fear was gone. The power had been returned to the people where it belonged. A few nights ago, Olivia and I were sitting on our back porch watching the sunset. It was quiet. The peaceful, beautiful quiet I had fought so hard for. My phone buzzed with a news alert. It was an article from the local paper about the ongoing HOA investigation, detailing the charges against Eleanor. Justice delivered with receipts. I put the phone down and took Olivia's hand. There were no phantom dogs barking, no enforcers circling, no tyrants watching from across the street. There was just the gentle hum of a neighborhood at peace. I had been asked how far a man will go to defend his own. The answer was simple, as far as it takes. And as I sat there in the quiet sanctuary I had reclaimed, I knew every single step of that journey had been worth it.